Hey everyone, welcome to episode 4 of Desk to Data Center. Today, I don't need these, we are installing ESXi on our Dell PowerEdge 520. So we'll go through the iDRAC to configure the disks, mounting the ISO for ESXi, and then attempting to install ESXi 8, but we may just install 7 because I bet 8 won't work considering how old the hardware is. But come with me, find out, and we'll see how it goes. All right, as you remember, this is our iDRAC interface, and we were having some Java errors earlier. Just for everyone's reference, that if you're using iDRAC 7, you basically need to go to a version of Java that's really, really old, about 8.162. And so you'll need your Oracle account, lame, and you'll have to go to their archives and download 8.162. If you have a newer iDRAC, newer versions of Java should be fine. I'm pretty sure even in the newest version, they're using HTML. So that's even better. HTML5 is the better way to go. Java sucks. I hate Java. Everyone hates Java except for like Oracle because they torture us with it. But that's a video for another time. So here we are logged into our iDRAC, right? And we've got it to a position where it is ready to boot Windows, but I don't want to boot Windows. I want to boot into an ESXi image. But the first thing I wanted to do was I wanted to show you all how to configure the virtual disks, and we can do these options now. So we'll go to our virtual disks, and you can see here that we have VD0, which is a RAID 1 at 278 gigs, and VD1, which is a RAID 5 at 1862 gigs. That's honestly perfectly fine. We don't really need to change that. I'm cool with that. If we go to manage though, this is how you can take care of actions like you want to delete it, you want to reassign disks, you know, all that kind of stuff. I guess we're not really gonna deal with that right now because honestly it's already queued up. You just go to action, delete, apply, reboot, it's cleared out. Then you pick your disks, you go into your create section, you go, oh, I want these disks, see, these disks are already all here. We're not touching these disks, they're good the way they are. And then we just attach it. So what we're going to do is basically work from this. So we're going to connect virtual media. It's going to do this, then we're going to go to map CD DVD, right? We'll pick a browse, we'll look for our USB drive. Hey, there it is. And we'll grab the VMware 8 ISO. This is free. Anybody can install ESXi. The base ESXi is free. It even comes with some wonderful features for about 60 days if you choose. So we'll just go map that. Then we'll go to tools or power, and we'll reset the system, and we'll hit yes. And we're doing this all remotely, essentially. Think of this as us being at our desk in the office, connecting remotely via iDRAC to this system that we can power on and power off and still have access to without having to go all the way to the data center, whether that's 10 feet away or 10 buildings away or 10 floors away. So it's got to go through its boot process, as we all know. And of course, we just sit here and kind of wait. We'll even maximize it, because this is really all we need to see for the rest of the video. And then we will do a boot manager. Helps if you hit the right button. And for the sake of simplicity today, we've only connected one other NIC on the Dell host, so we know exactly which one is supposed to be for system management, i.e. the ESXi management interface, which is an HTML5 client, which is what you really want everything to be, is HTML5 clients, because it's fast, it's snappy, and it's clean. It's not Java. Now, if we were in a more filled out environment, we would more than likely have a Pixie boot server that would know about this system and Pixie boot it and do those kind of things. So let's go into, I believe we picked Wi-Fi, so let's go in the Wi-Fi boot menu. Oh, don't do that. And that's what happens with Java. Now we're back. All right, now we have to remember we're doing remote iDRAC. It's not fast. Plus we're clicking things in menus that usually don't have a mouse. Now we're going to wait. And we are going to pick, I believe it will be this. Well, let's check our virtual media. Yep. Map to CD DVD. And there we go. So now we are booting in the ESXi installer. And what's really cool about this is that we're booting off of a USB key I have plugged into my desktop at my desk, sending this ISO image across the network to the server in the data center. And we're booting off of it to do an install. So this will take a little bit. We'll probably fast forward through a lot of this just so you don't have to sit through it. But when you're doing one of these for the first time, you kind of have to set and wait, and it takes a while. But once you've done a few, you get pretty used to doing about 4 or 5 at a time, or you get around to actually doing the automation that lets you do hundreds at a time, because you should really get around to doing the automation that lets you do hundreds at a time. And of course, there are also other ways to do this. Like I mentioned before, if we had a Pixie server with these ISOs pre-installed, and we had a configuration script and a lot of management stuff like Form and Puppet, or maybe Ansible, or even Terraform, those different options give us the ability to do this automated. The lifecycle management will let you also tie into those type of tools and allow you to do the same thing. We just have the one server for right now, so we don't have to get too fancy with it, because 1, we don't have any deadlines. This isn't a real data center yet. 2, why should I put in a bunch of effort to build the devices beforehand that I need you to see later? So we'll stand up the ESXi box, and then we'll start adding services like Active Directory, DNS, DHCP, Linux services, all these kind of different things, monitoring systems such as Ashinga, Zabbix, Nagios. Let me know in the comments which monitoring system you'd like to set up. I'm pretty comfortable with Nagios and Ashinga. So if you want something else, it will be a pretty big learning process for both of us. And I can recommend monitoring systems you should never use, such as Op Manager. Stay away from it. Again, that's a video for another time. I'm going to feel really bad if we get all the way through this boot section and then it says it can't install due to hardware that's not supported. Usually what will happen though is that it will install. It's just some pieces won't work. As long as our network card works and our storage works, not too worried about much else working in ESXi. We're not doing anything fancy. We don't have any HBAs. We don't have any fiber cards of any kind. We don't have any sort of GPUs. We're not using anything super fancy. It's pretty standard stuff, but ESXi 8 did drop a whole lot of the hardware supported list, which really usually just means it might run, but don't call us if you have a problem and you own a contract. Upgrade your hardware. We won't support it. And that's fair. I mean, they can't support every piece of hardware forever. That's ridiculous. I don't think anybody could. Now we get to wait a little bit more. And this isn't the Dell specific ISO of ESXi, though those do exist. Usually Dell, IBM, HP, Cisco, most vendors offer a very specific repackaging of the ESXi ISO to cover their drivers specifically, so that if anything's missing in the regular one, if you grab the Dell one, it will just work. I did not grab that for this. I probably should have, because they are free. They're available on VMware's site. You just need to make an account, so no big deal there. All right, here we go. We are in the installation screen. Pretty simple here. We hit enter. We hit F11 because we're going to continue. We accept the EULA. It's scanning for available devices. Hopefully it finds our hard drives. It did. We're going to install on the 278 gig, though that is way too much storage for ESXi. We'll use it for logs. It'll say, hey, you're going to destroy everything. That is fine. We are US, and we're going to set a root password. Something I can remember. Warning, the CPU in this host are not supported by ESXi. You can override and force install, but is not officially supported nor recommended. We expected this to happen. I am curious to see what happens if we install and continue, so that's what we're going to do. Are you sure you want to force install ESXi? Go to town. I also brought ESXi 7 in case we can't use this at all. But we'll see after we get it installed if it even works. It might not boot. That might be the worst of it, or we might just not have certain CPU support architecture, and it could be that I need to go into the BIOS and make some tweaks to the hardware for virtualization support, because this server was originally not used for virtualization. Though that stuff's usually turned on, hyper-threading and all that jazz. But then again, this server had Windows 2008 on it. So it might not have it. It might not have been turned on because they didn't know if it would work. So while we're waiting for this to finish installing, let me know in the comments what kind of upgrades you want to see and how you'd like to see those done. I have some ideas in mind. I even may have some partnerships, not really sponsorships, in the works, but I would love to have some more input from everybody about what they'd like to see, what would be beneficial to them as sysadmins that are trying to get started and get some feels for what's out there in the world. Or if you're already a sysadmin and you've seen me do all this and you're just like, you're doing it wrong, you need this equipment, you should get this and install it this way. Let me know in the comments. All right, let's see if she boots. Hey, and we booted. Very cool. All right. So now we're in the system. We just got to do a few configuration steps because, as you can see, it's looking for DHCP. Don't use DHCP for ESXi hosts if you want to maintain them. Again, that's just the old man grumpiness. We'll log in. We're now in. We'll F2 again to actually get into the, there we go, customization. We don't need to do that. We need to do this. Configure the management network. So the first thing we're going to do is pick it already found the one we need. Very cool that it shows up. We're not going to set a VLAN for it because it's not a trunk, it's an access. So the traffic is only one VLAN. It knows exactly where it's going to go. We do need to configure a static IP assignment because we did not set up DHCP on this network. So that's going to be 192.168.20.2. I think we're on 20. Yes. 255.255.255.0. I had to double check my list up there. And then the gateway. That's configured. We're not using IPv6, so we will be disabling that. It requires a restart to disable. We'll worry about that later. We don't have any DNS servers yet, so we can't assign those. So we can't give it like we could set a local host name, but we won't deal with that right now. It'll just be local host, and we don't have a custom DNS suffix yet, so we can't set that. So we will exit here. We will hit yes to restart the management network. And then there is nothing else to configure on this screen, so we can back out of it. Bloop. Now let's see if our IP address is working. 2.168.20.2. And there we are. Yeah, there's an invalid certificate, but here we are in ESXi, all done. You log in with the same account you created when you did the install. It's going to say, do you want to join the program? I usually say no. They don't need to know anything about me. This host is vulnerable because we aren't patched. You're using ESXi in evaluation mode. So let me show you that. So this is ESXi. We're configured. We're set. The only thing left we have to do is configure one other network. That's easy. So let's go through kind of the menus. The first thing is, it wants you to get vCenter, which is actually really, really nice. You can build a VM, shut down the system, reboot the system, refresh the system. Obviously, if you shut down the system, this is going away. Then we have actions, which are most the same things. We can enable SSH. Do not enable SSH unless you absolutely need to. ESXi shell, don't enable that unless you need to. Maintenance mode, super handy for when you're doing patching. The problem is we only have one host, so maintenance mode doesn't really help us out much here. Permissions, this is where you can set your user accounts for things like who's going to administer this and all of that. Get SSH for Chrome so you can SSH into this host. Again, I do not recommend you enable SSH unless you need to work on the system. Just so it's one less port that's open on the system that's vulnerable to any possible attacks. In your help screen, you get information about, your themes. Let's go oh wait, classic mode? Ugh. I'm not a fan of classic mode. Dark is cool. I dig it. It's easy on the eyes. Enjoy, everybody. It looks like there's an update button in here now. Okay, so you can either point it to a URL or download your VIBs, which is what ESXi calls updates, onto your data store and update that way. That's pretty nice because you used to have to use the CLI if you didn't have vCenter. Unpleasant. And then here's tools and stuff. Very cool. So what we can do is we can go to manage, and inside manage we have lots of configuration stuff, advanced settings. Sometimes you'll have to go in here if a CVE comes out that causes a lot of trouble. Auto start, you know, we can auto start VMs and things like that. That should be done. Time settings. You do want to set an NTP server because you usually point your VMs to talk to the NTP server that is configured here. That way they don't have time drift because their CPUs are virtual. They're not real, so they're not always on, so they're not always spinning. You know, it tries to save and that causes drift, which is it's a problem. So you want to put in an NTP server. We don't have one right now. We could put one in, but we're not going to right this second. This is your hardware section, so it'll tell you kind of what you've got available in here. It looks like it sees pretty much everything we need. Now, we're not 100% out of the woods as far as the CPU concern is involved, because we could have some blue screen issues when we have VMs. We'll just have to find out as we go. But it's just not supported anymore, so we have to be cautious of that. You know, we have to be aware of that kind of issue. Here's our licensing. We're in evaluation mode, so we have access to a ton of very cool features. That one we can't use because we only have one host, and two, we're not going to want to pay for. So there's no reason to get hunky-dory with them right now. Packages, I'm not sure what this is. Okay, so this is the driver packages for a lot of the stuff and the ESXi information packages. So that's kind of cool. So there's InfiniBand stuff, Mellanox, that's cool stuff. These are your services, much like Windows, Task Manager, things of that nature. There are services that run and stop and start in here. For instance, there's no NTP daemon because we don't have an NTP server configured, so that's stopped. When we configure an NTP server, this will go to started. SNMP, that's currently stopped. We don't have an SNMP server to send the traps to anyway, so there's no reason to turn that on. SSH is off. That's what we like to see. Syslog is good. vCenter agent, that's fine because you want that on in case you get a vCenter, which maybe we will at some point. I think that'd be pretty awesome. And then here's your security and users. So a lot of stuff you can do in here is the acceptance level, blah, blah, blah. Authentication. We don't have Active Directory enabled. So this is a confusing one for a lot of people. Don't enable Active Directory on your ESXi hosts unless you don't have vCenter. If you have vCenter, enabling Active Directory at the vCenter level gives you access to this stuff. You should most likely keep Active Directory and any other centralized identity management system off of your ESXi hosts, because that's just another way for a bad guy to get in. Create a root account, leave your root account there, set a really difficult password, and don't do anything else. You can set smart card authentication if you want to. If you have that, cool, do it. Another one, certificates. So this is a self-signed certificate, as you can see from this big not secure button up here. Now you can update these. If you have a CA and you feel pretty comfortable about following VMware's documentation and putting in, you know, certs signed by your domain, which again wouldn't have the IP address, we'd have DNS and we'd have DNS names and we'd make a certificate off that DNS name. Again, video for another day. This is just fine self-signed and they last quite a while. Yeah, 2034. And then you can, you know, refresh it. That'll tell you if you've got your new import right in there good. It'll make a new one by itself. Now that is kind of a problem if you somehow manage to never reload your ESXi hosts and upgrade them in place over and over and over for 10 years. This cert will expire and you will have to re-add these to your vCenter if you don't manually or automatically update your certificates. Here's your user section. As you can see, root, administrator, true. Some people probably say make another user and make them an administrator so that root can be disabled. That way it isn't they're not going to try to brute force it. That's fair. That's a reasonable request. Then you have your roles in ESXi, administrator, so they can do everything. Anonymous, That's somebody that's not logged in. This account, this can do nothing. Like they can even get in. No access, so you can specifically add no access to certain users to keep them out. No cryptography administrator, no trusted infrastructure administrator, read only, so they can log in and look at things, but they can't change anything. Trusted infrastructure administrator and view. From where I'm from and the jobs that I have done, users usually get you leave root as your administrator, and then you have a vCenter, and then those users are attached to vCenter and have roles such as administrator. I've yet to work in a place where more than just your main sysadmins had full control over the vCenter environment. There are things you can do, such as, resource pools, and folder access, and a lot of granularity, so that you can, pick a folder, put VMs in that folder, and then you can give folks access to manipulate specifically those VMs. And you can even control what they're allowed to manipulate. Maybe you want to let them add more RAM, add more CPU, but not add storage and not change the networking. You can control that. Or maybe you just want them to be able to change the networking. You can do all of that. You can do that through here. But for right now, it's just me, so I don't have to configure any of that. But no, it is available, and we can go over that if we get a vCenter and we get some VMs, or we might even go over it when we build our first VM, which is a little ways from now. And then your monitoring. So this is keeping track of all of our stuff like CPU usage. I think we can do memory. Yep. Network, which is going to be, fairly quiet. Not a lot of network usage going on. And then disk IO, which again, that's going to be a little loud because it's going to be testing things and making sure that the drives are all good, all that jazz. Hardware monitoring, so we can get sensor information. We can get IDs for SNMP traps. So if we wanted to send processor temps to our SNMP server, we could do that. Here's your event log, which tells you everything the system's been doing lately and any warnings. Oh no, VMNIC went in and link state is down. That's not a big deal because it's not plugged in. Tasks, these are things we're doing. And then as we do them, it'll show like target, initiator, and queued, start, result. Again, when you have a vCenter, all of your user accounts that you have attached to the vCenter will show up here as the initiator. And this will actually look really different. Then this is where your logs are. It tells you exactly where to look for those different logs. So if you ever do get a support contract with VMware and they say, hey, generate a support bundle, just click this button. You used to have to get on the system via SSH and download these things manually. It was awful. But they put in this wonderful little button, and they even have a system called Skyline now, which will, if you have a warranty contract and support contract, and you have Skyline installed, and Skyline thinks you're about to have an issue, it'll generate a support bundle for you and send a ticket to VMware. I haven't ever seen it do it, but that's what they tell me it'll do. So we'll see. And then we've got no notifications, so we're doing good. Now we go through our little list here. VMs, we don't have any VMs. Womp womp. Storage, this is our data store. So we've got data store 1. We've got, that's our teeny little drive that we installed ESXi on. We're not going to touch that one very much. Let's do a new data store and see if we can pick our other device. Can I not see it? It doesn't look like you can see it. Interesting. Data store browser. So there's our data store 1. Adapters. So these are our HBAs. This is our mini monolithic. This PERC H710 is handling all of our stuff. Let's make it do a rescan real quick. I'm kind of surprised that the other data store didn't just show up, because it is right here. So I want to use this. We'll do that. Use full disk. VMFX6 next and finish. Blah, 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 blah. It's going to be erased. That's fine. Bye. So now we got data store and data store 1. I'm kind of confused about data store 1, to be perfectly honest. That should be this bad boy. which is kind of what it looks like, but it's an interesting layout that I'm not used to seeing. I've never looked at this deeply in a while. So that's kind of cool. But again, in case you haven't heard, VMware doesn't really support installing on USB keys or SD cards anymore, though it is still an option. But if you do that, you have to remember to point your log somewhere else. We don't have any persistent memory. We're good there. So there's our devices. I don't like looking at them like that. I just want to look at them like this. This is throwing me. And then lastly, we have our networking. So the networking comes in basically a VM network. So they assume you're wanting to put all of your traffic on one VLAN because maybe you don't know any better. And that's fine. And that's all attached to one vSwitch 0. This is where things get a little confusing for people. We also have our management network. So we can take a look at management network. As you can see, VMNIC 0, which is a physical network card on our device, has connected in full, and we have one VM kernel port, 192.168.20.2. That's our management IP address. No promiscuous mode, no forged transit, no MAC changes, no, none of that. This is all defaults. Leave it, it's fine. Our virtual switches, we can go in here, we can see what's been set up. This virtual switch has no uplink redundancy. Yeah, we don't have multiple NICs, so we're not going to have any uplink redundancy. This VM network, we can actually get rid of. I believe we'll do that a different way though. Let's go to here. Port groups. Can I delete you from here? Actions. Remove. We don't need that. That's a junk port group that we're not going to use, so we're clearing it out. But what we are going to do is, as you can see, this is linked down. We are going to plug that in real quick. Once I find the cable, just a moment. Now that's plugged in. If I hit refresh, bingo. So what we're going to do here is we're going to build another vSwitch using specifically this VNIC. We'll go through the rest of the stuff before we do that though. So here's our VM kernel. This is our management network. We actually want to make sure that this can do, this stinks, but because we don't have enough network connections, we're also doing vMotion and management on the same thing. It's been configured. We did that when we set up things to begin with. We could boost this to jumbo frames if we had a better link, which would give us a little bit more speed, but we don't, so we can't. So we'll do that. This is how a VM kernel works. Usually you build VM kernels for stuff like the management network, the vMotion network, if it's a separate VLAN, which it should be. You do VM kernels for things like ESXi, which I hate. It's not my jam. And then if you are running data traffic like NFS over a separate VLAN, you build one for that too, because it's a specific configured IP address network for the ESXi host, not for your VMs. Building stuff for your VMs is different. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back here. We're going to build another vSwitch. We're going to add a standard vSwitch. We're going to call this VM data. It's going to use VMNIC 1, and that's fine. That's fine. We're not changing any of this stuff. So we hit add. Very cool. So now we have this switch, right? But there's no port groups, so we don't have anything to talk to. So we've got to add port groups. So we are going to go to, is this where you add port groups? It's been a while. We don't need to add uplink. We don't have one. Actions. Maybe we don't do it here from this. Yep, I guess we do it in here. So we add a port group. We're going to call it VLAN. If you remember, we set up VLAN 30 and VLAN 31. So make sure you type that in because it's plugged into the trunk port on our switch, and our trunk port is sending VLAN data for both VLAN 30 and VLAN 31. And we're going to assign this to the other vSwitch. And you might say, well, if you've got one vSwitch, why separate them? That matters later. This is future proofing. If we get a vCenter, which we're planning on getting a vCenter, and we want to add this switch and we want to convert our vSwitches to DV switches, which is vCenter's fancy networking that works way more conveniently than ESXi vSwitches. It's easier to have this separated on your hosts and only migrate the non-management network. And again, that's another old fogey thing, but we'll get to it when we get to installing a vCenter and adding DV switches. So for now, we're going to add this port group and put it on our VM data virtual switch. And then we're also going to add another port group. It's always good to try to name these very similar across the board. So if it's called VLAN 30 at your switch, you should call it VLAN 30 in your host. And that way you just understand where your traffic is and it makes sense. And we put this on data and we hit OK. So now, as you can see, we've got VLAN 31 and VLAN 30 attached to the VM data switch, which is attached to VMNIC 1. Pretty simple, right? So why do we do it like that? Why is this a trunk? What are we doing? Well, in a perfect world, this is a huge pipe. It's a 10 gig pipe. It's a 100 gig pipe. It's a 400 gig pipe. It's huge. It's massive. It's 25 gig, whatever. You put all your VMs through those trunk ports and they get all their traffic through one single port that can send tons of traffic at a time, because your VMs are very much not likely to be able to saturate an entire 10 gig link by themselves. So that's it. That's configuring ESXi. We installed it. Let's go back over here. So that's it. We configured ESXi. We installed it. We set up the networking. We added our other data store so that we have storage for our virtual machines. We set up our root user. We, got everything pretty much configured. The next thing to do is to build a virtual machine and get an OS installed on our virtual machine. So let me know what you thought in the comments. Give me a like, a thumbs up, a dislike, a thumbs down, leave a comment. Let me know if that's how you like to install ESXi. Let me know if you like ESXi, or if you're much more of an overt or KVM, or what other Red Hat Enterprise Virtualization, Oracle Virtualization. There's tons of virtualization platforms these days. Maybe you just run Docker containers instead of needing ESXi, which is fine for super small, tiny micro applications and things of that sort that go in and out. Most of the time in a data center environment, you're dealing with servers that have to be on 24/7, are usually Windows, not so much micro applications, more stuff that you really don't want to have in your data center, but you have it there. So you use ESXi or Hyper-V. Though I've heard that Hyper-V might be going away. Let me know if you've heard anything about that. Apparently Microsoft isn't pushing it as hard anymore. But Hyper-V is a great option if you have a Microsoft agreement, because it's covered in licensing and then you can install what you want to in there. There's only a couple of caveats, and those only matter if you're a really big enterprise. So anyway, thanks for tuning in for this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. And again, don't forget to let me know what you think down in the comments below, and we'll see you next time.